and welcome to day 3 of Rapid Plus TCT 2022. I'm Brandon Ribic, the Technology Director at America Makes, and I'm really happy to be joined today by my friend and colleague, Dr. Beth Ripley from Veterans Affairs. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, right. It's nice to be out and in person. Have you been enjoying your time at the show this week?
Yeah, it's been fantastic seeing old friends, seeing new technologies, and everything in between. So.
Yeah, for sure. I was happy to get a chance the other day. I got to be a part of the healthcare session in the morning. I got to help chair that, and there was so much great information there. You know, thinking about additive. There was an individual who presented the idea that we don't always have to think about making a part. It can not only be about rapid prototyping, but thinking about how additive plays a role in the development of medical devices, the testing of medical devices, the maintenance of medical devices, or even just aids. You know, for example, the ergonomics of things. And could we add something to a tool or a device that, you know, it just makes it easier to use? And it's so exciting to see that. Are there any things there, like within that you're seeing right now in the medical community?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the thing about additive is that it allows you to really unlock the full potential of what you can make. And for us in the healthcare space, this is all about personalization and customization for the patient. Or, you know, as you bring that up, maybe for the provider. And one interesting thing is, you know, you think about surgical tools, and you bring up ergonomics. You've got right-handed, you've got left-handed people, but you have people that have really specific ideas about how they want their tools to work. So being able to create on the fly, test it, print it out, say, is this what you're looking for? No, yes, and, you know, reiterate that day, you know, in a day or two is quite amazing.
Yeah, I agree. So I know you do all sorts of great work at the VA. How about maybe for those who aren't aware, do you mind talking a little bit about some of the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the Veterans Health Administration, we've been 3D printing for about a decade. But we've really been ramping up in the last 5 years to understand how this technology best serves veterans. And we found a few areas that we think are really strong areas for growth. One area is in assistive technology devices. So we're using additive to create devices that help veterans get back to doing the things they love. So imagine you couldn't use your hand very well and you love to shoot pool. What can we make to get you back to playing? You can't pick up your daughter or young child because of a tremor. Can we make something that gets you back to that? So that's a huge area for us. Orthotics and prosthetics is also a really interesting kind of on the R&D space because we're trying to understand how the technology is going to perform, especially with like weight-bearing prosthetics, how that's going to go. But you know, a huge opportunity to start to rethink how we do that, lightweighting, et cetera. We're using it for pre-surgical planning and thinking about cutting guides, things that aid surgeons to understand better what they're going against and how to get the result that they want. Dental, and then of course we're also interested in bioprinting too. Ooh. Thinking about organs and bones. So.
Wow. So I was actually, I just was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in an AM industry day at Cornell University. I was learning about some of that. And with the bioprinting, I mean, is that like a direct ink write process that you're using for the bioprinting, or is it something else?
You know, I think it's interesting because the term can really be used for anything that's actual cellular material or something that's a scaffolding that might hold cells, and there are different technologies. Within VA, though, we're using an extrusion-based system, so it's pneumatically driven. So you think about syringes, you could take, you know, I mean, that's something that's in every hospital. Yeah. So anything you could put in a syringe, you could potentially print with.
Cool. Yeah. That is amazing. I find that so interesting. So, you know, thinking around, you know, additive and healthcare technologies, you know, and really the theme of this year's Rapid, you know, the narrative is the next level and scaling to production. You know, from your perspective and the applications you've been looking at, you know, what are the things that the community needs to be thinking about in terms of quality assurance and quality control?
Yeah, so this has been a real opportunity and a challenge for us, I think, in healthcare. The first thing to bring up is really this concept of bringing the manufacturing into the hospital. And so point of care manufacturing, I think is, relatively new idea, but
Yeah.
not really if you think back, because if you go back in medicine, 50 years, 60 years, you'll find some of the most amazing inventions came from having engineers embedded in the hospital. So the physicians could go down to the engineering shop and say, I need X, Y, or Z, and they would make it. Now that kind of went away with some of the regulatory aspects and just the way that the market developed, but now with additive, that's kind of coming back in. But we have to relearn and remember, and maybe a combination of both, how do we do quality assurance around that?
Right.
And what does that mean? Because we have what QA looks like for physicians and nurses and healthcare, and it's different from what you have in manufacturing.
Sure.
So we're, again, just trying to kind of figure this out as on the fly as we go. In the VA, we did build out a quality management system, but I will say it was not easy. It took several years. We're still trying to get the kinks out. And I don't know that that's the way it should go for all hospitals. We're trying to figure out, is there something in the middle, something, that's scalable that you could scale down, like a mini, right, QMS. Yeah. And I think that's what we're going to need to figure out in the next 2 years.
Okay. Wow. So I guess in terms of, a lot of folks are very focused on development, a variety of applications, to say the least. But, are there things that you find or you found helpful, or things that we should all keep in mind as we start to try and take additive technology, say, from a lab environment to a medical manufacturing environment?
Yeah, I think this is a huge challenge, and this is actually really interested in the bioprinting space, if we go back there for a moment, because I think when we, and I guess I should also preface it with, there's R&D within companies, but then there's true research and development that's being driven out of universities and academia, this really benchtop research, and what you can create in the lab isn't necessarily at all what you can create to scale. And so I think, unfortunately, we see some really amazing research being done years, to get to a result that ultimately has no chance at viability if you're thinking about manufacturing and scaling. And so I think we're going to have to rethink that. We're going to have to get in close with our researchers early on, start teaching them about what it means to manufacture, and maybe iterate on that earlier. So yeah, I think it's a sad thing when you look at when the research starts and the product gets out, it's decades, and I think that's why. So this is an opportunity.
I think you bring up an excellent point, and I think there are many in the community who share that perspective. In fact, I was just in an event about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there was a prominent individual in this leading an activity, and the thing is that he said that they've been looking at, rather than say waiting until they introduce the product to the customer, bringing the customer into the development cycle, or those who are going to use the product into the development cycle earlier, so they know how, when they get it, how do I use this? How's it different than what I have been using? But I think those kind of shifts in our natural behaviors or our existing approaches, and exploring how we can be not only intentional but more efficient as we develop things, I think everyone's very interested in trying to understand how to do that. I think another opportunity, and I've heard a little bit about this and how it's a challenge, is the design of AM equipment. We don't need to get into specifics on specific products, but are there things that you think the additive manufacturing community needs to be considering whenever they want to try and deliver a product that is intended for medical manufacturing?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Well, and particularly if we can go back to point of care, because I think one of the biggest products that's going to come out of the additive field is the process, right? And coming up with, MDPS is what we're calling them from the FDA, but a whole process that allows you to have the technology, the hardware, the training, the software, the post-processing to make those products at the point of care.
Wow.
But to do that, you have to realize you're going into existing buildings, hospitals, oftentimes decades or maybe hundreds of years old. And there's challenges. I don't know a single hospital that I can think of off the top of my head that hasn't had to break down a wall to get a printer in, right? Or pull out the ceiling, so you have no, you don't have your ceiling tiles anymore for the, the clearance that's needed. HVAC is a huge challenge. Like, how are you going to do exhausting? A lot of these buildings, again, old, not made for this.
Right.
And then weight requirements too. You don't even think about the weight. And so a lot of these things are going to have to be in the basement, right? So.
Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful to start thinking about what does the hospital look like? How do we change those footprints to get them in? And also, on the flip side, let's start working with construction and the hospital planners of the future, and start to design hospital spaces that can accommodate this. So I think it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. I think it's an incredibly valid point because, folks think, well, I have a printer, right? I bought the printer, but the facilities have to have the right conditions in order to foster manufacturing operations. Mm-hmm. And not only that, well, maybe there's gases, electricity, as you mentioned, or getting the printer to where you want it to be.
Right.
And so, and I think not only that, as you start to move parts around or you take parts from the equipment, what do those workflows look like, mm-hmm. or how much access do you need? At least in the case of metal additive manufactured products, they can be quite large and heavy, and so you may need a hand truck or a fork truck or something like that to move something very large around in a lot of space. So, I think you bring up a lot of great points, and in fact, we've been pretty fortunate in the last few years to provide some input to some stakeholders on things to think about for the installation of additive equipment, and it's something we've partnered in the past with the likes of Underwriters Laboratory on trying to understand some health and safety aspects of it as well, and I think they've produced some great literature on that, and so incredibly valid point. I think, one other thing I'm curious to understand, Beth, you're doing such great work. Are there things that you feel the community needs to be focused on next, or where do you really see the future of additive in the medical field going?
I think it's the cat's out of the bag. The medical field wants to be involved. I think that, when you're talking about caring for patients, it's a passion, it's a career, it's a profession. And we want to be close to our patients. And so I think the community is starting to realize that we're not going to be happy just ordering something and getting it in a box. We want to be involved in the process. But we also realize we didn't learn this in medical school. So I think really it's going to be thinking about how do we come together. And, this is the marriage of manufacturing and medicine and the hospital and the fabrication space. And we're going to have to both be able to play in the field. So I think if we can work together to figure out what's the common language, where's the common ground, I think not only will it benefit the hospital and the patients, but I also think, to your point earlier, thinking about bringing in the customers, the end users, the stakeholders, that's something we can deliver from the very first second and have them running along in the process the entire step of the way. Yeah. So, I think there's a lot to gain there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Well, Beth, thanks for being here with me today. Yeah. It's really great to see you. It's wonderful to hear about all the great things that are going on and the things that you're involved with. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at Rapid.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Thanks.